What's up, bladers? In today's mod video, I'm going to show you how to take your left launcher and turn it to a right, and take your right launcher and turn it to a left. Let's get into it. Alright, bladers, so essentially what we're going to be doing here is taking the internals from the right and swapping it over to the left, taking the internals from the left and swapping it over to the right in order to do this. Therefore, then making this gold launcher kind of like a Free De La Hoya with the gold and red, and this one becoming more like a dragon or drums, which would be the kind of white and a blue scheme, even though this is a more clear than I was expecting. So let's get into it. As always, before we start, we're going to need our Phillips and flathead screwdriver. And basically here, you can pick whatever one you want. I'm going to go ahead and start by taking apart the right launcher. To do so, we are going to be taking out the 6 screws on the outside and the one in the center. For the time being, make sure to keep your right parts with the right side and the left parts with the left side, kind of. The screws, I mean, if you know the screws, you know the screws, but for the most part, just keep everything kind of separated so you don't mix up too much until you get started with the swapping. Okay, now that we have them apart, we are going to basically be taking the left internal spring assembly. You can leave the rod, you're just going to be swapping its side. We're going to be taking out the guide and swapping the rod over to the opposite side. Taking the guard from the right. So that's from the left. Putting it over here. So you'll see how that looks like that. Okay. Next part, we'll be taking both spring assemblies and swapping them. But before we can do that, we're going to need to take the strings and swap them over, so that we have the gold with the gold, but it's left spring, and the white with the white, but right spring. So to do that, what we're going to be doing is removing the 3 screws, swapping the strings over. I will show you that now. Keep these 2 gold ends separated, because sometimes this one can get stuck up in there and you may lose track of it, but you want it down here because it adds strength for the string when it's mounted inside of its in the spring mechanism. Go ahead and pull both the strings straight, because you're going to have to recoil them anyways. So, taking your right spring, putting with the new right assembly, and your left spring, putting with the new left assembly. You're going to take your gold handle, which is now going to be left, representing our boy Free De La Hoya. place the knotted end in this open area here and wrap it around in the crevice that they have designed for it. Taking your lid, lining it up. You can now put the screws back in and lock in this assembly. So our left spinning spring assembly with the gold handle, gold and red. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and follow this arrow pattern and wrap the string that way. Be sure to follow this side and not this side because that is a different arrow pattern. You guys can see that. And make sure to follow this arrow and go this way. And we will do the same for the other side. Okay, now that we're at this point, we now have our left internals and right internals swapped over into each of the shells. We have our string swapped over to the springs for each left and right. We now need to take these two pieces. We're going to go ahead and swap them. Unfortunately, they will be opposite colors now, but it's not the part that you're mostly going to see. There are probably ways you can change this up. I would not recommend painting it just due to the fact that it's going to eventually chip and make a mess and potentially screw up your bays. So maybe try some vinyl wrap if you have any, or even just like electrical tape. But just doing the outer edges here, I would say. I wouldn't do too much on the inside, just if you want to try and make it like black or white or whatever, but it's not that important to me because, like I said, it's the underneath part. You're not going to see it that much, so we're going to go ahead and just swap them over. You do have to do this because, as you can see, they're designed differently for the left and right. So moving on, we're now going to tension the springs and place them back in their shells and start to put this whole thing back together. To add this tension, what we're going to do is, following this side now, not this side, we're now going to follow this side's arrow to add tension. Rule of thumb here, usually between about, I'd say 6 to 8. You don't really want to go over 8. You probably don't want to get that close. I usually go about 7, sometimes 6 if it's a kind of a tight spring. But so let's see what we get here. Make sure that this stays coiled up as well. That's about 7 there. What we're going to do is we're going to place this part into that flat end there. Okay. Once you get that in, go ahead and place the golden guard piece into its little slot right there. You can set this down if you make sure that's in there good, but I'd be careful not to let that fall out. We're then going to take our top piece here. We're going to try and wedge this in between the sprocket and that guard piece to get it into the hole on the other side here. Making sure everything stays together. And after you get it shut, make sure it's coming through clean, make sure you hold it together when you're doing this. So do a test spin, nice and light. Make sure the tension feels decent. Alright, now I'm going to take our piece here. Those grooves are going to be for these tabs here. Go ahead and lock this whole thing back together. You're going to want to hold this kind of tight so it doesn't rotate too much and put tension on the string as you're screwing it together. And now we will do the same for the other side. Alright guys, so now at this point we can go ahead and put the last few screws in. We've checked it, we've made sure that they work. We're going to go ahead and put the last 6 screws in both of these, lock them up, and get some launches in. Make sure they're working good. Alright guys, so there you have it. Effectively what we've done is we've taken Hyuga and Hikaru's launchers and we've turned it into Dante's and Free's launcher. You guys can take this idea, run with it. There's endless options you can do. We've taken a blue launcher and turned it to a right with a gold plate on it so we could have Vault's launcher. You know, the options are endless. So with that, don't forget to leave a comment. Make sure you guys subscribe. Now get out there and let it rip.